Namaste, welcome. My name's Keith. This is an RX class that's going to focus on your knee joint. And the knee joint's a fascinating and incredibly frustrating joint in the body. It doesn't feel quite like it was designed for people who move around like us, but yet it's what we have. If you have a block, that would be handy to have close to your setup for today. We won't only be looking at the knee or moving the knee, but looking at some of the other support systems and factors that go along with knee issues or maybe knee health. Because it's not always just your knee that's giving you problems. Sometimes you have knee issues that are coming from your hip. Sometimes you have knee issues that are coming from weakness in your quadriceps or weakness in your hamstrings. And putting all those things together to help us figure out how to keep our knee happy. We'll also be looking at some rotations in the knee to make sure that your knee still moves in not just the flex and bend movement, but also still rotates. So those are the things that are coming at you for the next hour. Settle in for now. And on your dominant hand, join your pinky and your thumb. And let that rest down on your knee. That's Buddhi Mudra, but it's also called the fluid mudra. And on your opposite hand, join your ring finger and your thumb and rest that on your knee. Right? So when you have fluid in one hand and earth in the other, and that's appropriate for not just the knee joint, but it's appropriate for all of your joints, right? We need a solidity of earth. We need this strength of the bone, but we also need a fluidity in the cartilage so that we have this ease of movement, this fluidity of movement, so that the joints move in the way that we want them to. Of course, we don't want them to be too fluid. We want that beautiful mix of stable and fluid. So let that settle in and let that drop onto your knees. And close your eyes, if you like, for a moment. And just find your breath. So when you breathe in, allow yourself to breathe all the way down toward your belly. When you exhale, feel your exhale drop out from underneath you, down through the floor someplace. And let the way that you breathe be the way that you imagine your joints moving. Not just your knee joint, but all of your joints. And allow yourself to breathe a kind of breath that encourages fluid movement in your joints. And if you imagine moving this way, it also changes the way that you carry yourself or the way that your skeleton carries you around. So breathe in a way that you would like your joints to feel. And then begin to notice in your seat what you feel in your own knees, in your own hips. And breathe some of this attentive, fluid breath to your own knee joint, to your hip joint. Any stuckness. Soften any judgment around your joints, right? Sometimes when we have a joint that is problematic, we judge it. We point out, oh, that's my bad, fill in the blank, my bad knee, my bad ankle, my bad shoulder. Rather than assigning it that sort of moniker, allow yourself just to breathe a fluid breath in its direction and give it a little compassion, give it a little space, perhaps give it a little love. And then use your next exhale. And you can make the sound Om. your breath come all the way in and all the way out. And then undo your fingers. You can move them around a little bit. And then find your block. When you use the block this first time, it's going to go between your knees. Recline back onto your elbows and place the block between your knees so that it fits at a spacing or a width that feels like it's pretty much the same as your hips. You don't want it to be so narrow that you have to squeeze in to bring it in, but have a little bit of extra room. And you're propped on your elbows rather than lying all the way back, because that immediately changes what you experience in your abdomen. And then when you get there, start with one foot on the floor, and then lift the opposite foot. So it doesn't have to go very high. And then for a moment, we're going to be doing some rotations through the knee joint, but I want you to notice the difference. If I circle my leg around, and I'll change the angle in a moment so maybe you can see that a little better. When I circle my whole leg, the block shifts and moves some, right? So it kind of shifts around. So if I turn my body this way, you might see that I'm doing a lot of what seems like movement in the leg, but I'm not actually getting to the heart of the matter. I'm just moving my whole leg, and there seems to be a block in between. And this block is bobbing up and down in between. But if I bring my leg up, and instead of circling the whole leg around, and just turn my toes out, and turn my toes in, the block doesn't move. So now I'm rotating the lower leg. So I lift my foot up that way, about parallel to the floor, a little bit lower. I'm going to turn my toes out, flex my foot, and then bring my foot down. So my heel bone comes toward the midline. Then I'll lift that back up, come back through the middle, turn my toes in, and lower my heel down so it's outside my hip. And then lift it up, rotate it in, bring it down, and up. So I'm changing the rotation through my lower leg, and the block just gives me a reference point as I rotate and lift. And because I've rotated, that's why my leg doesn't really go down to the starting position, and I angle out and in accordingly. When you're doing it, you might notice that you feel the muscle right at the hip crease working as part of the stabilizing. So that when I lift up and I turn in, especially right there, I want to feel some fire in my hip, creating some stability. Earth, fluidity in the turn, dropping it out. In, down and across. Couple more times with this leg. Keeping it nice and active. Out and down. Last time in, out, touch, and then relax. Move your hips a little bit. And then try that with the other leg. Soften and adjust your block as you need. And then lift your foot up on the other side so it's a little lower than parallel to the floor. And then flex your foot and turn your heel in. And then pull your heel down so it touches right in line with your tailbone and your pubis. Lift it up, turn out, and then drag that down. All the while keeping the block in between my knees. Moving it down and up. Turning out my heel and coming down. In, and all the while there's some flexion in my ankle. So I'm making sure that I keep my ankle flexed. When you flex your ankle, you do turn on some more of the ligaments around your knee, so that in this movement of rotating, I'm also protecting the knee with the flexion of my ankle. Every time I pick up my foot,
I'm having to use my quads in my left leg to help it come up. And because I'm moving slowly, especially when I'm coming back down, there's a subtle contraction in the hamstrings. So using the muscles on both sides of your leg, knowing that you want strong quads to help move your leg into extension. And you want strong hamstrings to help move your leg into flexion. A lot of action moving through these ideas. You might also be noticing the heat or fire on the front side of your shin bone when you do this, along with the muscle on your outer hip. A few more times there. And there's always going to be some small amount of movement in the block when my leg goes up or down. But the block bobs up and down a little bit rather than going around in circles. A couple more times here. That was my ankle, not my knee, if you can hear that. It's a funny sound. One last lift, turn it out, there it is. Lift it, turn it in, drop it, come back to center, and drop your leg. And then you'll use your block to sit on. And the block just gives you a little height off of the floor. So you gotta make sure that you don't sit so far back on it that it feels like you're gonna fall off. And because I'm sitting up a little bit higher, it gives me room to bring my feet back a little bit closer. Because I'm sitting on the floor and I have to manage my spine in a different way. So I'm gonna sit tall with my sitting bones on top of the block and get a little bit taller there still. You can use your fingers down on the floor to help stabilize you. And then extend one leg out long. And then lift that leg up and watch for the muscle in your thigh and see if it turns on. Lower it down again. And then bend your knee, and you can use your hand to bring your foot back to where it started. Extend your leg low, so there shouldn't be a whole lot of action going on in the thigh there. Then the moment you pick up your thigh, see the muscle of your leg turn on. Lift it up a little bit. And then lower it down, bend it, and bring it back. Extend your leg, lift your leg. No need to do anything with your foot. And then it comes up perhaps almost to the level of your opposite thigh. You lower down and retract it in. Extend your leg out. Use your quadriceps and the muscles on the inside of the leg, the medial side of your knee. Lift your leg, lower it down, and then replace it. So using the quad, a little bit of gracilis to really feel stable and lifting up your leg. Watch out for doing anything that says, that reminds you of lifting your kneecap or dragging your kneecap up. No need for any of that. As well as forcing your leg to be 100% straight here or locked in the knee. There's a little softness in the joint, and that gives me a different kind of access to the muscle of my thigh. Extending. Lifting. A little turn out in your leg if you have a hard time finding the muscle turning on, will help turn it on, and then you can rotate back in, lower, bring it back, extend, no action, lift, there's the action, lower it, retract it, extend, nice and soft, lift up, lower it, retract it. A few more times. Reach out. No action in your foot required. Just let it go along. So the muscle really stabilizes the joint. Lower. Extend out. Float your leg. Doesn't have to come up all that high.
lower it down, drag it in. One more for each leg, lifting, lowering, retracting. Last time for your last leg, extend, the muscle turns on, and then your leg comes up, down, and then let it go. And ease yourself off of your block, and then start with your legs wide apart. And once you have your legs wide apart, bend one leg so that your foot comes not all the way over to your thigh, but it's more in line with your center line. So you feel your heel bone in line with your pubic bone. There's some flexion in your toes more than in your ankle. And you'll notice that my knee doesn't come all the way down to the ground, and it doesn't need to. But as I breathe in, I get taller. So I allow myself to sink down into my long leg sitting bone and then grow up. And as I'm breathing in, I'm going to shift my weight so that I'm targeting the knee, moving the weight there, letting it drop. I'll feel my opposite sit bone come off the ground and come back to sitting on it. Inhale and shift, and then come back. So you're targeting your hips now, finding room in your hips, breathing in and shifting. And I want to make sure that my knee comes down as I hinge so that I'm not asking the knee to move in a way that it doesn't move naturally. So the femur bone drops, my knee drops, opposite sitting bone lifts, and then I can really feel the space between my two hips. Coming back, moving, opening, over. Simple, but that space in your hip, when you lose it, when you lose the openness, the room that you get when you externally rotate your leg and get room into your hip, the place that often starts to compensate, especially when you practice asana or do anything where you're more asymmetrical and working on space in your hip, your knee will try to compensate. So by making sure that you drop the femur bone, drop your knee, and then even though this leg is floating, I'm imagining this leg getting longer. So I get room into this hip, but I also get space on the opposite side. A couple more times there. Last time. Lean, drop, space. And then switch it up so I can bring my opposite foot in, extend out. And you might notice when you do this that your opposite knee doesn't drop quite as easily, right? So sometimes taking the flesh at the backside of your calf and not trying to rotate your leg, but just moving that skin, moving the muscle up before your leg comes in, creates room for your knee to bend a little bit deeper. And so then when you get there and you feel like you're set, spread and flex through your bent-like toes, sit taller. And then as you breathe in, drop your femur bone to drop your knee, feel room in the opposite leg, and then sit. And then open by leaning, tall, space. And then in and out of that. So it's just a little tug in both directions through the bent knee and through your long leg. So in that lean, I imagine that both legs can draw out of the socket a little bit. Reaching. Few more moments here. You might notice how I do a little bit of a point with my foot as I'm leaning. So I turn on the length of the leg that's long, and it grounds me down through that heel a little bit. So I'm not flexing this foot and trying to move there because then I'm stuck, right? But when I point through my ankle or plantar flex the ankle, it allows me a different access to this leg drawing out long as my opposite leg is dropping. And if you want to do something with your arms that encourages that kind of length, well, only you know, right? So do what you need. Finding the space. And even though it's a rock, don't get into moving quickly, right? Allow yourself to move deliberately with your breath. A few more times. Last couple. Once more. Good. And then bring both legs into a bend. And since this leg was out long last, I'm going to bend that leg and set my heel up close to my body. Bring in whatever foot is flat to the ground. And rather than holding onto your knee, go underneath your leg. So I've got my forearm right in the knee crease, and then I can use my opposite hand to hold on. And naturally for me, my foot kind of hangs right in line with my knee. But I'm going to bring that foot and my knee more toward the midline. So I close in rather than opening up. And then a little bit like what you were doing on the floor with the block, you'll do a little flex with your foot, turn your toes out, and then lift. And then bring that down, turn in, and lift. Turn your heel in. So then the whole lower leg rotates. And you're not going to see it in the knee when you do it, but know that because you're keeping your femur bone relatively still, and you'll see how your foot pendulums in, rotate, out. Then you know right there that you found some rotation without the whole joint changing place, right? So if there was nothing happening and I rotated in, I'd see my femur bone move in, and then I'd come straight ahead, where I go there, there. But the moment I keep my femur and my thigh still, just cross in there, sweep my heel in, come up. And if the lifting is too much, you can hang right here and just work the rotation so that you turn your heel bone in, you turn your toes in, and you switch side to side. Because then you're still getting some of that rotation without adding the flexion to your leg, or the extension rather to your leg in that movement. But if it works for you, rotate your heel, lift up. The force that I'm applying with my arms is not a small amount, right? Because my leg really wants to get away while I'm extending my leg. So right here is where I have to apply some work with my arms to keep my leg from stretching out. And then you'll take one more in each direction. Not trying to get 100% long through the leg in that moment, but feeling where you can go. And then switch sides. Bring in your heel, go underneath your leg. And then sit tall. So you're making sure that you're not leaning back in this moment, that you really feel long through your spine. And then some flexion in your foot, turning in. So remember, bring your leg toward the midline. And your heel turns in, and maybe you just turn it back out there and go low through the rotation. You can even have your heel on the ground, if that's easier to do, right? Or if you're willing to, when you come in, and then turn it out.
And if you can see in front of yourself, one side of a V, and then the other side of a V. And I'm not saying it should be hard necessarily, but it also shouldn't feel like you're just kicking through space, right? So that it's really controlled, attentive to the movement. That you can really feel the muscle action that goes along with it. That's the balance of the earth and water aspect. Right? Because if it's all fluid without any earth, that's when we have problems. Too much flexibility, not enough stability. It's a visit to the orthopedic surgeon usually. And you might find that one side is more cooperative. Not unheard of. A few more of these. I think that's mind over matter too. You'll notice in one rotation that you have to really focus on your leg not losing its rotation while you're extending. For me, it's the in-turn of my heel, and right there, making sure that everything stays where I put it. Good, and then relax your leg. Find your block again, and I'm going to set mine on the low height. It doesn't need to be any higher than that. You can see that. And then my feet are going to go on top of it. If your block feels too high, anything that you have around, a couple of books is also fine. I'm not going to do anything with my hands there. I can use my hands to help me sit up. I'm going to leave some space between my feet. So just getting there and using my hands to support gives me the stability and the confidence to let my legs drop open some. So I have the space that I want in my hip. I want some room in my hip. I want there to be a flexibility in my hip. And once I know that that's there, I'm going to bring my hands around. So now I'm not holding on to the seat. And then I'm going to close my leg in just so I touch my arm, and then bring it back down. And then come on up and drop it down. And I'm not changing my feet just yet. So I'm still on the edge. So that I'm using the power of my inner hip to bring my leg up. So the adductor draws up. I'm not pushing down with the abductor when I come down. There's some work, there's some energy there, but I'm not trying to find new territory. And then it might be that after this one, that you come up and you can move your arms out of the way and come in a little bit more, and then go over. So you get full closure. So having space and strength in your hip becomes beneficial to your knee.
You can have more of a step now. Because my arms are out front and my spine stays long, I'm also working the muscles that support my spine. Benefit to your overall posture, to your overall stability. A few more of these. Last couple. And one more. Good, and then release. Stretch your legs out for a moment. Move your feet a little bit in the windshield wiper kind of fashion so that your whole leg loosens up. And then you're going to sit in what I call a mandala seat so that both legs have roughly a 90-degree angle. Because when you come into this shape, your inner knee takes a lot of the weight, and you really feel like you're dropping the bony side of the medial knee right into the floor. You're going to place a block under that. You just need enough of the block, so it's not in the middle. That feels like it's in the way. And back toward the edge. And then I'm going to rest a hand on my knee there, and my body will naturally go away from that. I don't want to collapse in that space. So sit up as tall as you can, and then focus first on your foot. So I'm going to put a little flexion in my foot, turn on the ligaments around the knee, roll into the big toe mound so my heel comes up, and then drop my heel, and then roll it the other way. So it's that familiar rotation that we were working a moment ago. So pivot onto the big toe, heel up. Pivot onto your heel, toes up. Kind of like when you were lying on your back and holding on to the block, all the while keeping some flexion in your ankle, and then rotating the lower half. So it rolls into the midline, out of the midline, into the midline, out of the midline. Keeping the muscle on the front side of your leg coming to life there. And then you might find that after you get into the movement, you don't have to use your hands quite as much to keep yourself up. And you might, right? Might means it might not happen. If you start to take your hands out of play and you feel anything in your knee, then put your hand back down. A couple more like that. And then simply switch to the other side. So a little support for your knee. Flex your foot. And then roll to the inner big toe, down to your heel, and then pick up your inner big toe. Rolling in, rolling out. Rolling in, and rolling out. So relating to the midline of your body, even though you're not in line with your body right now. Notice what's different between the two sides. If finding the rotation is easier or more difficult on one side or the other. You can take your hand out of play and sit up without that support. You'll definitely feel the muscles on your side body working to help keep you upright there. Last couple. And then go back to the first side. We won't do as many. And it might look exactly the same for you. Or definitely use your hand to support, the other hand on your knee. Lean into your hand, so now your whole foot floats from the floor, and then roll in and roll out. In, out. So touch your toe, touch your heel. Touch your toe, touch your heel. And you notice the muscle outside your hip probably getting angry at you now. So it's floating, and then the big toe touches. Floating, inner heel. Last two. Big toe, heel. Big toe, heel. A little bit of that one goes a long way. To the other side. Press into your hand on the floor. Let your foot come off the floor. So you feel the muscles outside your hip, and then big toe, heel. Big toe, heel. Into the midline, out of the midline. Into the midline, out of the midline. In, out, in, out. A couple more times. Big toe, heel. Big toe, heel. Last one. Big toe, heel. Great. And then you can move your block off to the side and come into a wider stance. So wider than your hips, ever so slightly. And plant your hands, if you can, on the floor. You can always have a couple of blocks underneath your hands. A little turnout in your toes, right? So that you have your knees, when they bend, they'll go toward your toes. When you bend your knees, consciously send your hips backward in space. And right there, you can lift your heels and then stretch your legs. Bend your knees, more weight to the toe or the ball mound more accurately, and then up. Getting into it. You're not going high on my toes, because I don't want to take the weight in the knee joint. Because my hips are going back, I lift my heels to give me my first access to the bend in my hip. It's nice to breathe in on the way down, because that puts more emphasis on your chest opening, and your gaze can go forward, back up. There's almost no weight on my hands, so I'm not dumping all the weight there. My hands actually help me to send my hips back. So as I'm coming down, deepening my hip, and up. And then pause there for a moment, and just move a little bit. And it might be that when you do that again, you lift your heels in the movement. But if you can keep your heels down and focus now more on the deepening of your hip crease, move your hands a little further forward, so that when I breathe in, my hips go back, my knees bend, and I keep moving back. Keep that back movement on the way up, so that there's very little weight in my hands, and then I shift the weight toward my hands, breathing in
and out. And it's not about going deep, right? So if I go too deep and I feel my knees revolt, stop here someplace. So I feel my hip muscles. I'm building strength around my hip while also having some flexibility in the knee joint. If I have a strength that supports my hip, when I do something like bend my knees deep into flexion, then I'm less likely to feel like the knee joint's taking all the brunt of it. And I'm coming up slowly so I can really feel how my quads fire. And you might notice your hamstrings resisting the movement some. Few more times. Last couple. Last one. Good. And then you can bring your feet a little closer together and ease yourself up to stand. And then once you've done that, set yourself up so that your toes turn out just a little bit. Again, so that when your knees are bending, they move toward your toes rather than knocking into the midline. And then once you've got that set up, keep your knees in a soft bend. And when I do that, again, when I notice, if I bend my knees, where do my knees go? Do they immediately cover up my toes? Or can I bend my knees, look down and still see all 5 toes on each side? And when I'm there, this little soft, standing on a subway kind of stance, freedom in my low back. Then I'm gonna move from this place. I'm not gonna straighten my opposite leg. I'm gonna drop down, touch my knee. Both knees are bent. Keep your standing leg bent. Touch your knee down. Keep it bent. Come back, maybe the top of your foot for your knee. Because I'm in this constant soft knee bend, then my quads have to stay on the whole time. Notice where you're looking. And keep your head up. Keep your chest up. So that you don't hinge forward and dump into your knees. Especially once you point your foot under and press into your foot to lower down. Because my toes have this little turnout, you'll see that when I step, my body rotates a little bit to come down. There's a lot of heat right now in your thighs. There's certainly a lot in my thighs. A few more times there. One more for each leg. Good, and then shake your legs a little bit. And then there's going to be one more of these single leg works, right? Same little turnout. So that I set myself up to make sure that my knees are protected. Same little knee bend, so I'm softening into my knees. And then when I shift the weight into my right leg, extend my left leg out and touch my heel. Extend out, right heel. All the while both knees bend. Reach. Reach. And then that can turn into a deeper drop. Reach. So that when I extend, I can hinge my hip. Come in. Extend deeper into my hip crease. So it's a flexing of the hip, but I have to reach under. So as long as you keep your toes slightly turned out, you're less likely to feel something that you don't want to feel in your knees. Only a few more. Last couple. Last one each side. Good. And then one last experience, I'll say, for your quads. I'm going to put the block between my knees. I'm going to use a thinner setting now so that my feet can come close, and the block is fairly far back. So there's a divot still between my two thighs. Inhale your arms up, and see if you can keep your arms alongside your head as you bend your knees back in space. And then back up. Exhale, hinge at your hips, and reach back. And then that's the movement. So it might stop here. Inhale. You might find that you can hinge deeper and sink in before coming back up. Your heels might want to turn as soon as you get to the deepest part, so keep reaching your outer heels out. The block gives you a reference to the middle, so that you're not squeezing your knees together, but you're just keeping the block in between your legs, using your adductors. Couple more. Last one. And then release your arms. And set your block over to the side. And then stand on your 2 feet, and they can be their normal space across. You're going to have a hinging on a single leg. So both hands can come over toward your right hip. So that when you hinge, your left leg simply goes back in space. And then you come back up. Both hands over to the left. Hinge. And in this hinging motion, you have to navigate balance for sure. But your hamstrings are also stabilizing. So move slowly. Try not to turn out with your lifting toes. If your hamstrings don't like it, bend your standing leg a little bit. Because that's the action of your hamstrings doing their work. To bend your knee. And trading side to side, maybe your opposite hand. So if I'm standing on my left foot, my right hand will drop. If I'm standing on my right foot, my left hand can drop. Just gently touching. Moving through these single legs. Pause a couple times. Once more. Each leg. Good. And then stand on your legs and give them a little shake. And then we're coming back down to the floor to finish up. So definitely have your block close by. And maybe even some padding underneath you. I'm on the carpet, so it's nice and soft. And you're going to use your block as something to sit on. So I'll face you for a sec. So when you set yourself up, my toes are not in line with my body, but they open outward. You can see that, right? So they're wider out from my hips, so that when I sit down, there'll still be some space between my knees, and I can use the block to bring my hips up. And then when I'm looking at my 2 feet, I want to make sure that I'm not sickling in or out with my feet. So I can take the skin on the outside of my thigh. If I lean to one side, smooth down. And then again, look at my foot and make sure that it's not sickling. And if it is, bring it in a little bit closer. Right? So that you're sitting up tall and sinking down. Noticing that if when you sit, you immediately want to lean your weight off your bum to take pressure from your knee or from your ankle or from your hip, you can always prop up higher. But sit the way that you can sit relatively comfortable. I mean, it's not the most comfortable seat in the world, but the nice thing about it is when you're sitting here, there's some space that's being encouraged in the knee joint, especially if you can actually drop into your seat and not lean forward. If I'm really stacked over my sitting bones, I feel more weight, especially when I'm sitting on the block, more weight on the front of my ankle than I do in my knee joint. And that's what you want, because that gives you the space without the pain. You're not doing it to put yourself through some sort of test of agony. You really allow yourself to sink. And when I had a knee injury, this was one of the shapes that I used all throughout the pre-surgery as well as post-surgery to give me the space in my knee. Now, that's my body, so I'm not telling you that you can do this to rehab your body, but it gave me a lot of information in my own knees when I needed to see a surgeon, and then even as I was healing from surgery, to allow myself to be in this deep flexion, to find the room between the upper and lower leg, with a drop of the inner thighs, this inner rotation, deep flexion, and simply sitting. And we won't stay here for long, just a few more breaths. You can come back to the way that you were breathing at the beginning of the practice, with a sense of fluidity. Fluidity in your breath, ground in your seat. Release all the tension in your jaw. Just 3 more breaths here. Breathe out one more time. And then ease off of your seat, come to all fours. Move the block out from underneath you. Move your feet over to one side. So you can stretch yourself out. And put yourself down on your back for Shavasana. Let your feet relax and naturally drop open. And that'll move all the way up into your hip socket. Sometimes a little wider spacing between your legs is helpful. As your legs drop open, let your pelvis get heavy. When your pelvis gets heavy, feel the difference in your belly. Every exhale, the muscle, your organs, and the skin all get heavier. Your shoulders melt toward the floor. With that exhale, carry the weight all the way down from your shoulders to your fingers. Bobble on the back of your skull a couple times. Find the perfect resting spot. Soften your jaw hinge. Turn off the muscles of your face. Release your expression. Breathe less. Really become part of the ground. And then begin to breathe deeper again. Move your hands, move your feet, your ankles. Give your arms a stretch overhead. Bend your two knees. Windshield wiper a couple times side to side. And then you can rock up to sit or roll to your side to come up to sit. And once you're up, cross your legs. And cross them in the same order from your first seat, if you can remember. And just notice for yourself if there's any difference from the very first time you came to sit. Any more freedom or space. And then bring your hands up into the center of your heart. Breathe in for Om.
We are truly the light of each other. And I bow honoring the divine in you. Peace be with you. Thanks for tuning in.